Hello. Welcome to the Farm Country Update. We see a few more folks trickling in, so we want to give folks time to get connected. Welcome, welcome. All right, great. Well, thanks for joining our Farm Country Update today. I am Candace Burgish, and today we're going to be talking about next level selling and marketing. You should start to see some visuals here shortly. Thanks a lot for making the time to join this webinar. We have a couple of folks here today. So myself, like I said, Candace Burgish, I'm the Director of Data Insights and Storytelling here at Farm Journal. So I'll be walking through some data and intelligence related to machinery, row crop operations, and applications across auctions, dealerships, manufacturers, all things machinery is really our focus for today. And then after we get started in a little bit, we'll be joined by Casey Seymour, who you might know as our Vice President of Machinery here at Farm Journal, as well as the voice and ideator behind Moving Iron and a part of our team over at Machinery Pete. So there's a lot to cover today, so I'll go ahead and get into it. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A area to drop in your questions or anything you're interested in learning about. Feel free to drop any comments you have in there as well, if you have things you'd like to share. And then also throughout there, we'll be having a couple of poll questions that will pop up on your screen. Respond. Let us know how you're feeling about those different questions. And then at the end, we'll have open Q&A to address some of those direct questions to us. And Casey, thanks for joining us. I see you there. Do you want to introduce yourself to the team?
Yep. Hello, everyone. Good to see you guys. I am Vice President of Machinery for Farm Journal. I have a pretty extensive dealership background, so I look forward to talking with Candace about how data can work and with finding customers and selling more iron.
Absolutely. Let's move some iron. So today we wanted to kind of start with some grounding truths, right? Like the things that we all know are available realities of the world we're working in. First and foremost, the time is money element, we always know, but more than ever, like farm budgets are tightening, economic forecasts are really tough, and then consolidation has been increasing across the country. So we know that's putting that pressure on both the producers that you're working with, your customers, and your businesses on the auction, dealership, and equipment manufacturer side of the business, as well as all the support services in between. So more than ever, we're hearing from you, especially, that it's difficult to wrangle like really cumbersome long lead lists. We've kind of gone from having no data into having a lot of data, and now we're really into that area of what do we do with it? How do we navigate through it? How do I make sense of that, as Casey said, like on the ground at the dealership? How do I turn this into making a deal and reaching a prospect? So we'll be talking a lot today about how you can kind of really put these data pieces into practice. And then finally, what underpins everything in this industry, really across agriculture and equipment in particular, no surprise to you guys, is the personal relationships behind this business. Investments like these in machinery take a personal handshake. In a lot of cases, they want to know you. But really, data and intelligence can be used as another tool in your toolbox. So, really adding fuel in your tank on how you normally do business is how we're kind of bringing data into the equation. So not a replacement for that human contact, that relationship building, but really kind of how do you supercharge that? And then how do you scale it? So how can you reach more than the different prospects you can talk to one-to-one in a day? And how can you understand the hundreds of leads? And who do you call on first and prioritize your time? So there's several different areas there. And I see some folks have participated in the first poll, and we're seeing some good confidence in the data that you're having with customers. So that's great to see. Like I said, we're seeing that first step into getting data into your hands, and we're going to take you from where you are now into that next phase into the future. So thanks for kind of sharing that opportunity. And then going forward, data and intelligence, really broad strokes in terms of a word, a comment, a different area of work can be really broad. So I really want to ground us in what does that mean for our conversation here today? And also what does it mean for Farm Journal and how we're approaching data and intelligence? So essentially insights that are kind of pulled through Farm Journal come from three different areas. First and foremost, there you'll see in the center is our unique first-party data, and that's direct conversations between, your customers, the farmers and ranchers across America, and Farm Journal directly, telling us about their operations, their preferences, their needs, what they want to hear about, and how their day-to-day looks like. And then also on the left, you'll see the government and industry sources. So you may have tried to venture into some of those publicly available data sets and census and all those different areas. But as you know, it's really difficult to take some of those sources and turn it into something you can use. So we've actually ingested all of those as well and are able to visualize across those data sources. Again, focused on saving you time, energy, and gaining additional learnings beyond what we can learn from just talking to those producers one-to-one. And then on the far right, we also have not only just Farm Journal of our original magazine, if you're very familiar with that, but also all of the properties across our kind of ag web, drovers, top producer, of course, moving iron. Now that we're kind of moving into machinery, peat, and areas like that, all of the data around what are different farmers and ranchers engaging with, and the dealers and yourselves, what's most interesting, what's kind of going across this industry is all a part of the database behind these findings. So as we say, this is what we found. We've looked into the data. I want you to kind of imagine all of these things pushing behind those findings. So really kind of getting into the real problem, the real kind of challenge in front of us right now for those of us who are working in machinery is that we have created this kind of area where we need to learn more about prospects. We need to learn more about farmers and ranchers and kind of where they are in their operational health. So the question came to us of how can we predict this consolidation that's taking place in the industry? How can we know kind of where this is going to be hit hardest at an individual level, also at a territory strategy level, and maybe even broadly across industries. So we've actually taken this on and tried to find a solution and have built a predictive model around consolidation. So our team of data scientists has integrated all these different data points you can see here on the screen, from land transactions to credit scores to consumer behaviors and market data, and really applied that across what we know from our producers about what their operations are going through to be able to categorize individuals at risk of, at risk of consolidation, seeing that their kind of properties or opportunities are likely to shrink or consolidate for that operation. This maintaining group, where the operations are really trying to just avoid shrinking, not really on a growth trajectory, but try again next year, keeping that farm really focused on their longevity. And then in the growing area, where they're making these kind of growth, expansion, investment kind of moves. So that's really a key way that we can kind of start to break down those hundreds and thousands of potential customers into some buckets that are a little bit more manageable. So the way that we've kind of heard this, I want to provide some context underneath what that might look like from your point of view, from your seat on the bus, is really looking at how does that show up at your door? When they come onto your lot, what does this look like? So when we kind of think about a growing producer who's really looking to expand, from your experience, if you're talking with this individual, you're going to start walking towards that higher spec, larger capacity piece of machinery, newer off the line. That's kind of that far left, that growing area. When it comes to the maintaining producer, you might be talking to them and they're interested in kind of replacing existing machinery, keeping up with the times, making sure they're kind of have something that functions well, but we're not going to the end of the spectrum there. You're most likely walking them towards, a 2010 middle kind of capacity tractor, utility kind of item. Those are really appealing to this maintaining group. And then on the far right, you can also see that those at risk of consolidation, they're most likely to be interested in replacing broken parts, implements, those kind of pieces. A lot of different opportunity here. Casey, you and I were kind of talking about how these segments show up. Do you want to add a little context on that?
Yeah, we were talking about this getting started. I immediately went to, everyone has an inventory bucket that they're looking at. and you're looking across your inventory and you're trying to figure out how are we going to go after these customers and who do we need to be targeting. And if you look at, some of your newer 1 to 2 year old used equipment that you have in your inventory, it's, isolating those operations that are in a growth mode, that have some strength, that are looking to expand to the next generation, so on and so forth. We can help you kind of direct you into that direction, right? If you have that 3 year old to 7 year old stuff, how's that maintaining group coming into play? Who's that buyer and what they look like? And the other side, on the risk consolidation side, if you're an auction company and you're sitting here listening to this, here's a great opportunity for you to see where that business might be coming from for you at, and where is that next sell coming from. So there's a lot of great information here where you can help pinpoint those customers and to fit those inventory buckets or those needs for your business as we start looking through this.
Exactly. There's different parts of opportunity for everybody. So it's a matter
Yeah.
of, one man's trash is another treasure is very much true
Hmm.
throughout this data. The way you look at
Very
these,
much.
we've found some things that are, maybe an obstacle for one, but something to capitalize for another. So kind of getting into that, we really wanted to drill down into a specific group of producers. I'm very much a one who wants to leave you with something, not just talk around what we're seeing, but specifically about what can you know and what can we learn about this group when data is applied. So, for example, we wanted to look at the US row crop producers. There's a lot of conversation around the markets and the prices and trade deals and everything going on in this area. Well, how has that affected the producers in terms of their consolidation risk? So, when we actually map our consolidation index across US row crop producers, and that's corn, soy, and wheat, just for our kind of sample purposes, we were able to find that there's actually 58% of producers who are still in that maintaining category. So they're not quite in that dire straits, that really tough situation. They're really just kind of moving forward, making some really secure resilience planning decisions and waiting for better markets. There's some real practicality going on here. And also you can hear that those at risk of consolidation, that's nothing to ignore. 16% is definitely a significant population of row crop producers who are starting to look into kind of their options as there's some consolidation taking place. And the 26% down here at the bottom of that growing opportunity. And this is across all sizes of operations here. There's still a good amount of health here in the market. So that's kind of a green, opportunity that could be tapped into depending on what you offer per Casey's point. It depends on inventory and what kind of your focus is. And then to kind of drill a layer deeper, we really wanted to tug on this consolidation model across the database and find out where is the kind of tipping point for where consolidation risk can really drop off. So we've found that it's actually right around 500 acres. So operations that are doing row crops over 500 acres have only a 1% kind of risk of that consolidation. Like 1% of these producers are facing that risk or being categorized in this area. So there's actually 54% of the producers who are hitting this criteria are in that growth and expansion mode. So don't be over, shadowed by some of the loud voices around some, really difficult constraints. They're very, very real. But this is a group that's really looking for opportunity, and these are your most likely prospects, especially for that higher capacity machines. And again, as we said in the previous kind of area, those in the maintaining shouldn't be discounted either. They're just looking for something a little different. So, each group of producers and individuals have their own needs, and where we look at the data, we're able to kind of see for each group what could pique their interest, what could solve problems for them, and help you better start conversations, especially if you're trying to build new relationships. This is going to be really valuable information for you. If you're green in this industry or getting into a new territory and starting to do things, this seems to be something that can help you skip ahead and get some experience. So the following kind of analyses, I brought you 5 key findings to kind of really dig into this group of opportunity, and we'll go through them here. So the first finding is that larger, more diversified operations are actually more likely to maintain or grow in the coming year. So while the smaller, less diversified operations are more at risk of consolidation. It's not an end all be all, but when you know likelihood, you're able to kind of strategize around what these types of customers are like, what they have, what their problems are. You can kind of start to tick through what would be most valuable to bring forward. So going down here, I wanted to show kind of exactly what we're talking about. On the far right, you can kind of see kind of income levels, debating on those different categories. So growing and at risk of consolidation. What does their financials kind of differ here? So you can see here, at risk of consolidation, they're really averaging around like under $1 million in gross farm income. And then those who are growing are around that $2.5 million or higher amount when we're looking at these categories in broad strokes. So it really starts to give you an idea of what type and scale of investment is reasonable for that type of operation to be taking on. And also, like again, why does it matter? Why are we really getting into this? Is that these equipment pieces can provide efficiencies for those that we know are large, complex, diversified operations. They're not only looking for things that can handle their capacity, but also things that give them time back out of the field, back to their
Yep.
other projects, managing the herd. That's also part of their livestock focus. So as you're talking about features, really think about if there's any kind of time savings that are available through specs, new technology, any kind of things, even plain speed is definitely something that can be helpful. So talking through and knowing their situation, that's going to pique their interest a little bit.
Yeah, I'd add something to that too, Candace. I think, why does it matter thing, one thing I worked with a lot with the sales guys I was working with back at the dealership was trying to make sure they understood who was in line for retirement and moving on to the next thing, and who was going to take that land over, and who was probably, and then, and not any other reason than what was our relationship with the person that was taking that land over, right? Who was going to be the next person coming in, and did you have a good strong relationship with that person, with that group of people that are coming in, and moreover, did you have a good relationship with the next generation coming back into that organization? That way, when you had the conversation, hey, ABC Farms, they're retiring and they're going to come back in, and farmer B over here is going to take over. If you have a bad relationship with that person, and you don't, and they're going to take over, you're just growing their acre footprint. I think it's harder and harder to look at how you're going to functionally move forward and gain more market share or keep your position you're in, or those kind of things, and understand what that looks like. So you ask why it matters. If you look at where the growing is sizable, the incomes and the benchmarks that are there, it's pretty easy to point to someone and say, "Hey, look, this more than likely this customer is not going to be someone that's going to be around for forever." And they probably had that conversation with you too. So understanding what that looks like and where those acres are going to go, and what that next chapter in that farm's operation looks like, whether they're growing or getting out, and understanding who those people are was a very strong kind of a mark of health for what your little county maybe look like, that your territory in, or as a whole. So very important to know where that next generation is coming to come, where it's going to come in, and what's that farming operation going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. There's another piece you just brought forward that I forgot to mention, which is essentially like we're calling it at risk of consolidation, but really that can mean a lot of different things. The changing of hands, any way that Casey just described, is also taken into consideration in this consolidation index. So there's age and maturity and different elements of that operation that are kind of leaning towards a changing of hands, absolutely, this can be used for planning for that next generation and letting you know, hey, if you've got a producer that's like categorized as at risk of consolidation, it's time to start doing those phone calls and paying attention to who's next in line. Completely good strategy I hadn't even thought of. And then for another kind of digging into this, we talk a lot about technology. So the second finding I wanted to bring forward is there's some truth to it. There's a correlation in the data across interest and adoption of technology and being a growing operation. So not only is it this kind of shiny story of like an innovative producer, there's a correlation in that appeal and that engagement and more likelihood of being a growing operation. So when it comes to working with these producers, again, thinking of our most likely prospects on the buying side, you're going to be interested in these little features, right? All the different specs and different things that are interesting there. You're kind of touching a hobby as well as a day-to-day feature of something that's going to be a part of their operational efficiency. So there is something there to lean into when you're talking with a likely growing operation, or if you know from the data that this is a growing operator, talking about all the different things that it can do is going to appeal to them. But I also have a caveat here in the top right of the slide to make sure I call out there's a balance. So when it comes to talking about the different technology integrations with a piece of machinery, there is a tipping point. When it comes to too many features, too much work, it starts to sound heavy. So how much time is this going to cost me before I can even start getting into the field? The owner's manual looks like this. There's a little bit of fear and apprehension there. There's less fear and apprehension with these growing operators and a lot more amongst those at risk of consolidation. So again, as Casey said, strategizing before you even pick up the phone or start having this conversation is going to help you be in the best position. But you can also now, based on what you've learned here today, start to listen for those signals and calibrate in the conversation to make sure you're not overwhelming. I know we've heard of several stories in the field over the last couple of months of folks who've been able to close the deal and get a high spec machine out, to a customer, and then that's brought right back for a trade-in for something a little bit older. And that's a difficult situation to be in, that no one's really having a good time. So that's something you can always work on, just by having a little bit more prep before you go into that operation. And the third finding here is about regions. So when we talk about really specific, is it harder in some areas than others to move certain type of inventory? The answer is wholeheartedly yes. So you may have known or experienced a lot of this, but I'd love to validate your experience. If you're in any of these states where you're having some challenges, what you're seeing is you're not crazy, right? If you're trying to look at a growing operation, you're more likely to find those producers in the Iowa, Illinois, Kansas area, as you can see on the map here on the right. That's the hot spots for where there are more concentration of producers who are in this growing segment. And then on the flip side, you have the most concentration of producers who are in this at risk of consolidation category up in Wisconsin and kind of up north in general. So this tells us that, if you're trying to move a piece of larger equipment up here in the north, you have a steeper hill to climb. It's going to be harder to find the few producers that are there that are in that growing category. Doesn't mean they're not there, but there are just fewer. And then also on the flip side, we've talked in the field, like I said, over the last few months with a few folks, getting some different stories and information about what's going on before we kind of go into the database. Was talking to a fella who had a large capacity combine out in Oregon, and it was, ready for corn, but he knew kind of from years of experience that that was not going to be a likely market to move that piece of machinery, so he was going to ship it east. I could see here from the data without even talking to each other. I said, "Did you send it out to the Dakotas?" And he said, "Yes, he did." And it's sold out in South Dakota. So you can see here by the data, you can strategize around that in advance. And, I'm able to come in as a third party and actually be able to confirm like that was a really astute business choice to do. And especially with transport costs, that trade-off can be a tough conversation. Something like this can help you make that decision. Or if you're getting pushback, like within your team or managers and kind of making that decision, something like this could help you kind of put it on the table and have a conversation around, it's not just Candace's or Casey's idea. It's driven in the data that we're going to have more prospects for this machine out in the Dakotas. So just one
Yeah.
example of some practical use.
I got a question for you, Candace. So if I'm from Wisconsin right now and I'm looking at this, I'm saying, oh man, what's going on in Wisconsin? How would I use this data to say, yeah, there's a lot of consolidation going on, right? But I'm looking at the footprint of my dealership or my auction company or whatever it is I'm looking at. how can I use this data to say, all right, we know who those consolidation people are, who the consolidators that we need to be paying close attention to. How would you use this data to solve that problem?
Definitely. So I think how we would kind of have a conversation about what you're trying to move, right? Inventory first of like what scale, what type of equipment, where you're trying to go to, what's your specific goal. But then in Wisconsin, what we're going to see is a higher frequency of a changing of hands of mid-sized to small equipment. There's going to be a lot of kind of exchanging going on. So that's a lot of selling opportunity in that area. So if you're looking at how do I move like different pieces of used machinery, that's going to be a key element there. And then also try to look at who your prospects lists are. It's going to be most important to know who those few people are. How's your relationship? And really strategize on those top 5 prospects around that. And if you're working in Wisconsin, does that answer your question, Casey?
Yeah, I think so too. And then on the other side, like on the growing side of it, if I'm in Kansas, right, and I'm trying to figure out a lot of growing operations out there. How am I going to distinguish between who's growing and who's really growing? Like how am I going to use that data to show that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's this is just one set of buckets, right? To get started, to really categorize these prospects into potential. I always use the example of being at the eye doctor, where you're kind of having those lenses dropped in front of your face of, is this more clear? And then they drop another one. Is this one more clear? Is this more clear? So what you're describing there is a couple layers deep, and you really can start to kind of segment out by potential crop type, operations, gross farm income. We could go into kind of activity, intent signals. If they are in our group that's been looking and researching these types of equipment, there's opportunity there. And there's always the added benefit of bringing in your own customer data. So the real magic can happen when we put together your purchase data and history on that prospect and how that growing or consolidation behavior has been taking place. And then we add our model on top. There's some really cool opportunities that come from digging in there. So
Yep.
either it, and I really think that's true if you're on the growing side or the risk of consolidation side. Again, there's the world's your oyster. It just depends on which seat you choose to look at it from. A lot here. And if anyone else has any other questions, please by all means drop it in the Q&A. We'll get to those as well. Our fourth finding is a little bit more kind of along the same lines, intuitive. So we're kind of thinking about attitudinal, behavioral, those kind of preferential, like personal kind of behaviors. So this is really interesting when it comes to especially those who are in sales, might have brand new relationships you've been handed from a previous group where you're trying to expand to know what you're walking into. So there's really a key opportunity here where you can see growing operations are more likely to be open-minded, flexible, and ambitious. So that's obviously with like a grain of salt to an individual level, but overall we see a trend here. So for again, looking at Casey's question of what do you do if you're trying on this growing market, capitalize on those prospects? This group is open to listening. So it's worth it to invest in these relationships, have these conversations, call them up and let them know you've got something to look at on the lot because they're looking at kind of engaging in different information gathering behaviors. And this is a really interesting like marketing tool in particular where you can kind of see what kind of lines of messaging you would be interested in saying, all of the most ambitious, if you're trying to grow to your next level, these are the kind of, tools that you'll need. Those kinds of things are going to stick out to them. There's a really interesting piece here too. I want to point out at the bottom, especially in the why does it matter category. So we know that like overall, row crop operators who are more likely to be growing are open to influence in their counterparts, but we see that show up in the brand loyalty and in price sensitivity. So, especially in equipment, you don't have to tell me that there are folks who are born every day and put directly into a Case IH onesie or directly into a John Deere kind of outfit, and they have pictures throughout their life, signs in the shop wall, everything. Like brand loyalty is a real cornerstone, right, of machinery. However, What the data is telling us is that there's some tension with that brand loyalty between their price sensitivity and deal seeking love. So they may come into your kind of dealership with a Case IH hat on and then leave having bought a Fendt. There's different opportunities depending on what you're working on if it makes practical business sense. So again, we see different opportunities when it comes to switching or converting market share a lot in this area. So if you're the larger market shareholder, let this data be an encouragement for you not to let off the gas because there are some of your relationships and partners and prospects who could be wooed by a dang good deal. So that's something that we're seeing in the data. And then on the other side, if you are kind of on the smaller market share side, it's worth it to reach out to folks who you know have purchased from competitors in the past. They might be on the fence. There's some opportunity there. I'm always looking for, is the juice worth the squeeze as we recommend and work with partners? This one's definitely worth it. And Casey, I think we were talking about, did you see something about like brand loyalty kind of out there in terms of different prospects?
Yeah, so we were talking about that when we got started, and over the last 5 to 7 years, brand loyalty is still it's still there, it's still strong. But just like you talked about, there's that part in there where, hey, maybe it's worth taking a look at this because the deal's good enough or something like that. As you've looked at this, how real is that data, right? And we were talking about that a little bit. So like how real is that likelihood to change in a newer generation compared to an older generation?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's the most interesting part about working with our partners in the data is every slice can be similar, or every once in a while you get one that's really different. So I'll tell you from across working at brand loyalty across a few different slices, we do see some correlation with age. So there's a little bit of a dwindling in loyalty the younger an operator has been in the cases that we've looked in. I don't want to know like specific categories and some other elements to cut it and give you a good kind of update, but I will kind of give a bonus nugget of a trend there of, yeah, that brand loyalty is definitely a tradition that might be kind of on the way out. But however, there's always time to reinforce that. But yeah, especially if you're representing a brand, it's time to make the calls to make sure that that gets reinforced with this next generation of producers for sure.
Yeah, internet's made the world a small place. So looking at what you're doing and where you're at, it's the idea of shipping stuff now. It's not nearly as big of a hurdle as it was, say, 10 years ago. So when it comes to price, anyway. So,
Exactly. And kind of along the same line, I have this as a reminder here on this slide as well, especially if you're working in like sales and marketing. You can think that, as it gets more efficient, as I know my prospects, it might make sense to like cut back on like the broad scale marketing. In this case, we are still recommending you lean into those kind of air cover support for your ground game kind of marketing because they are listening to a lot of folks. You see that high influence on the right, and especially, friends and neighbors is always going to be high amongst different agriculture sectors. That's a tenement kind of the sector. But you can see that they're looking at current trends and advertising. Typically you can see folks who are really averse to getting information directly from companies, brands, dealerships, etc. They're open, they're listening. So grab those open ears wherever you can get them for sure. And then finally, thinking about that, it wouldn't be Farm Journal, Farm Country Update if we didn't talk about the producer experience. Really think about, you've got your targets in front of you. We know you're under pressure. We've heard it from a lot of our partners. There's always this do more with less mentality that comes through. However, make sure to pause. Remember that it's what it must feel like right now to be a producer that's categorized at risk of consolidation and still being inundated with offers, subscribe, buy, all these different competing opportunities. You're one of thousands of, different contacts being made to this individual person in a day, in a week, in a month. It can be really overwhelming. And so, what we really want to do is use data to kind of do this differently, do it smarter I love to use this example of, does this make any sense at all to sell a high-spec combine to someone with a Fiat? There's different opportunities. This is obviously wrong, and obviously in Europe, but it's obviously wrong, and it doesn't make sense. So when you're throwing kind of untargeted marketing into the marketplace, it can feel like this kind of unnatural push. Instead, this person needs a truck and trailer properly scaled for this kind of towing and other things as well. But really being able to use data to find out what do they really need and provide that. And that's a win-win connection where your business is prospering and that farmer or rancher is served with what they need. So that's really kind of an opportunity amongst using data. And to get into that, like, so what do they really need? Answer our own question. Is for those with growing operations, we're actually able to see what they're most interested in. In planting equipment comes to the top of the list when they're researching and shopping the most. So the data actually is telling us that we're able to look at this as actual browsing and activity data around research online around these different pieces of machinery. So again, not even just asking what you're interested in, but using that hard data of what are they actually doing and spending their time on. We're able to see that the growing producers are more likely to be like looking at planting, tractors, tillage equipment, and then harvesting and applicators here. And what's interesting about that, and why does it matter, is that you can prioritize what you're bringing forward to them based on these kind of behaviors. And so this was just really illuminating, especially like this is data pulled yesterday, to really see that in the heat or on the back end of harvest for a lot of states, we're still seeing that level of activity at the planting. This is one full year's worth of data. It leaned heavy planting this year. So I don't know, Casey, what did you think about this when you saw it?
I think it makes some sense if you look at where, looking at planners and upgrading planners and those kind of things. In the situation right now, I think guys are looking at how can I increase my efficiency and increase my yield, right? And I think that has a big play while you see planning, obviously tractors is always up there high too. Um, tillage and harvesting, that kind of a little shocking to me a little bit, but um, you would think that harvesting would be the next number three, applicators number four, and then I could see tillage being number five, but it's not a big factor there. You got to have seed bed prep before you start throwing your planter across there. So like that makes some sense too. But when you're looking at harvesting, harvesters, again, they're really it's a down year, and combines are expensive, and more guys are looking at trying to run with what they have a little bit longer, and that's showing here. So um, not overly surprised, a few things here and there, but overall, it just makes some sense.
I love that. You can't really harvest anything if your planning went poorly. So it makes
That's true.
complete
Makes it tough. Yeah.
farmer brain logical sense.
Yeah.
I love
Mhm.
when the data just checks against real world experience. Every once in a while, we find some crazy outliers, but this one, yeah, you can't argue with the practicality. But again, if you're trying to move harvesting equipment, it makes sense that you're having a struggle. Like they're not really getting into that until they felt like their planning and tractor and all these tillage needs are filled. This is kind of where you are in the queue. So make sure that that takes it into consideration for reasonable expectations as well internally amongst your leadership. This is a good thing to kind of pass through. And again, I want to drop another lens down on our kind of clear picture of what's going on in the machinery industry was digging deeper into the planting machinery and the tractors. Like what kind of horsepower, like what are we looking at in terms of different capacity of these machines? And Casey, this one is kind of interesting. Is there anything surprising in this one?
I think two things. One is I would expect to see 100 to 174 horsepower tractors being a little bit bigger just because of where the cattle market's at and how loader tractors fall into that. But at the same time, if you look at ranches, what they've done, they've invested their money back into their operations via cattle and buying down debt and all that kind of stuff too. So that makes some sense. If you would have, you know, held me at the edge of the building here and said, "Casey, I'm gonna let go if you guess this wrong," you would have been tossing me off the top of the building. There's no way I would have guessed that drills would have been higher than significantly higher by, three-quarters of the traffic being in drills and not planters. That's one thing that I definitely found to be um, kind of shocking there. So uh, maybe that shows you a little bit where the state is right now, and when people are looking at wheat production, those kind of things, maybe it's a bigger part of that. But drills, and again, like you said, you pulled this information yesterday, but it's 12 months worth of data, right? It's not something we just pulled the last quarter of the year, which you would expect to see, drill activity be a little bit higher going into the last, third, fourth quarter because of planning situations. But that's a little bit flip different direction than I would have surprised.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, it's really good to go into data in any way with open eyes, ready to bust some myths and see what you might learn and what you've been missing. There's these little opportunities, little golden nuggets, maybe where you've been working in that territory for a long time. There might be a prospect you've been missing on, or perhaps, yeah, you've been leaning into the wrong type of machinery and they've been looking for something else from your competitors for quite some time. It's really interesting to see, what kind of opportunities come up. So whether you have, yeah, 2 or 3 years of experience or 30 years experience, there's a few surprising nuggets to kind of come through.
Yep.
And again, our final piece here we want to share with you is kind of how you can actually do it yourself. So we really want to make sure that you're able to find and use data. You've seen what we've been able to do, like Casey and I kind of bringing this through, looking at some problems that you've shared with us about different opportunities and things you wanted to learn about. But there's a good approach that you can take to really use data to understand where you should be working, who you're working with, what can we lean into? Just get an idea of your different roads that are in front of you, right? None of them are necessarily bad. It's just choosing the option that best fits your business in a lot of cases. Data can really help with that. And then really turning that into like connection opportunities, marketing activations. And then, of course, our unifying result is getting that performance, seeing that iron moved, some prospects served. Farmers and ranchers need your machinery. You need to give it to them. There's a mutual benefit here that's a pleasure to work in. So I wanted to show you kind of everything I've shown you to this point comes from just two pieces of really the portfolio of different data and intelligence needs that we've kind of designed to serve machinery and other segments here at Farm Journal Intelligence. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of go into it and activate it. You're going to see a poll question here as I go into like showing you an actual practical example. But feel free to let us know like what's most valuable to you. It's really interesting to me and to Casey especially. We're always listening. You're the experts in your industry. We're trying to figure out how can we help you and get through these obstacles. It's a true partnership. So I'm really interested to see what you're most interested in. So answer the poll along the way as I kind of show a few different things that are coming up. But essentially, this is our dynamic profile. So everything, all the findings and insights that I was able to find in the first kind of section of our webinar there were all pulled from a dynamic profile. So you can also, if you're a data person like myself and love to just get into this wicked data, then you're able to kind of do it yourself and navigate at your convenience. You can also do it quickly. And if you're not a data person, you can also partner with us to have us go digging for you. So whether you like to mine your own gold or have us kind of pull it forward for you. There's a lot of different options here. But I want to show you kind of how it works. So I can able to like adjust these different filters to narrow into who my customer is. If I'm you, like I'm a dealer, right? I know what I need to move and what I'm really looking to reach and what type of producer is my ideal customer. I can use these type filters to navigate into scale and where they are and what they kind of need. So I can adjust this income here down on the left up to like 1 million minimum. I don't want to deal with the, producers who are at risk of consolidation for this piece of machinery that I'm focused on. And then also say I want to sell it with a corn header. I can focus on just corn and can really focus on like by crop type and operation type as well. And then also, as I go through this different profile, there's all this different information about the producer. So as I've filtered out the folks who are like most likely going to be not in the area that I need, I can see all these different practices down here in the bottom left. So I can learn about their tillage. There's a lot of opportunities in changing tillage and conservation, for instance. So we can kind of see some of those practices here. You can also see, size and scale, again, digging into their finances, investment potential, how diversified they are. All that information is really at my fingertips about this. So it's really interesting when it comes to like engaging with the data and engaging with my prospects. This I kind of use as a map. It really helps me see the lay of the land and start to define where my trail is going to be. So you can also kind of see there's some different filters here of kind of growth in finance. So this is specifically that consolidation index that I've been working on. That's something here you can really see. I can apply that like growing and maintaining filter here and start to see some changes in who I'm talking to and who my most likely prospects might be. So then from here, you can see down to the county, the concentration of producers, and that's farmers and ranchers in this case, but I'm looking at corn acres, so just farmers, but looking at where the highest concentration of producers with 1 million minimum gross farm income and kind of that corn acreage minimum and the growth and finance category within the consolidation index, growing and maintaining, where are those most likely prospects for that higher spec machine? And this is just a sample. I've pulled in like 400,000 records into this demo tool today, so don't take this home and start calling on folks in Hawk County. This is just a sample for today, but you can see how I could then use this to start to design where I'm going to do outreach, pass it to my marketing team to do paid social, turn these into zip codes and start pushing paid ads. Or again, going to my prospect list and seeing who do I have in that county? Who do I know and do I know them? And start making some really strategic decisions. And I see here the polls about close, so this really interesting piece. It looks like most of you are interested in trade-in frequency and predicted next purchase timing. So I'm glad to see that coming through. I'm going to get to that right next. So when you're looking at these kind of focused areas, and I'll share these results back out so you can see them actually if you want to click into it and see it, or you can click out of it. Really interesting. And then as we're going back to this data demo, you can also see how I can overlay facilities and locations on top of that as well. So really interesting. We're only using select corn processing facilities in this example or retailer locations for just some capacity example. But there's no reason we couldn't apply and kind of look at your locations if you're a multiple regional area and how that might overlap with your prospects. So there's different opportunities there as well. I know, Casey, do you want to speak into kind of the territory approach?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll throw out there is if you can look at where your territory is at and understand what what the farming habits are, and if there are things like you have the conservation part, which I'm probably still it's under here and probably jumping ahead on you a little bit, but the conservation side of that to me is when you're looking at where the conservation part of that is, and you're looking at your territory, if you're seeing a big trend line where farming practices are changing or new cropping practices are changing, something like that's coming in, that changes, the equipment's that's going to come into there. What you're looking at, what customers are interested in buying, those kind of things. So that changes things dramatically. Also, too, from a location level perspective, looking at it from a county perspective, again, understanding all that stuff that's going on, you laying all those different things back in there, the consolidation index and all these different things that come into play. What's the financial situation of your customers, purchasing motivations, tech adoption, all those things start coming into play. It starts telling a pretty good story about what your territory was and what it's turning into, right? What it was, what it is, and what it's turned into. And it starts laying out that what kind of people do I need to have at the dealership level now? Where do I need to beef up my strengths? Where do I need to beef up some weaknesses? Those kind of things, and start working your way through that. It paints a pretty good picture of what that customer's new motivation is going to be as things, as we transition into this next generation of farming.
Definitely. And the next generation in particular, you can see a lot about this, like to Casey's point, strategize around kind of the territory outlook, but then drill down, right, into the individuals. What can we learn about kind of those kind of prospects? And to kind of step forward, there's a couple of marketing features here that are really cool. One of which is this topics of interest. So again, I always like to trust but verify. You're able to see this is a real-time tags from like Ag Web and Farm Journal properties from the journalistic content that we have across that team. They're tagging that content with these different codes. So then we're able to see what are they actually reading about every day? What are they engaging with? And you can really use these topics of interest to plan a year's worth of social media or use these as keywords to push paid campaigns. There's really a lot of opportunity here. And then also down here in the right hand corner, you can see which channels are going to be the most, appealing to this group. And they change a lot based on the different segments and groups, a lot of change amongst the different groups. So we'd really encourage you to take a look at kind of what your customers are and what they most need. So you can lean into the right areas and just kind of keep that good media mix going, but really make sure you're leaning into those areas of opportunity. And even going a step deeper, we can even check those who have like a high risk tolerance. Knowing it's a difficult market and investing in low price times takes a little bit of guts. We're able to see those who are really kind of equipped to take on those long-term investment risks and learn a lot about different behaviors and attitudes as well. So you can see a wealth of information here in this dash to kind of look at how do we design messaging, how do we have conversations. This can really be used for sales and marketing, depending on how you want to be prepped to go into those engagements. And then we talked about conservation, the opportunities there. And there was a question come in I saw about kind of wondering how can you look at this in a more specific way? And how can you really start to put your customer data along with kind of this data that we have here at Farm Journal? So we can actually, again, pair those two things together and be able to generate a list of your prospects that you already know based on both our data and your kind of data on their history. So this is just an example of like what it could look like to be able to filter into states, maybe a customer segment, and be able to see like when that next purchase date could be and predicted make. So that was the number one thing from the poll just now of like wondering to know what's that predicted purchase going to look like. That is something we currently offer. So that's really exciting to see. And you can also really strategize down to like just 4 leads. So it's really
Yep,
make it manageable.
yep. Well, like you talked about, you get this list, you get these lists of 200 to 500 names on there, and how do you where do you start, and like are my ways to just go 1 through 500 and hope that I find somebody. If you have something like this, you can give a list of 5 to 10 and on a specific piece of equipment and go out and see what you can make happen with that. And it really your the level of success and the level of buy-in, I've never met a sales guy that was angry that they got a list of things that sold something off of, right? I mean, if you can put that in front of them and you can show, hey, these there are 2 or 3 people on here that bought something out of these 10, right? They're going to want another group of 10, to go out and do that again with, and this makes it pretty simple to make those things happen. And you pairing your data with what we have at Farm Journal, it really opens up a lot of doors to how you can interact with folks that you know and folks you don't know, and it makes a big difference. So,
Exactly. And where are they? Right? Like where are they
right, exactly,
located? Are they
exactly.
have
Where
they
they at? Yeah.
moved? Are they close? Especially those of you who are managing national kind of approaches or regional areas, you can really get down to who is they going to be? What do we know about them and where are they? Does it make sense for when you have a piece of equipment come in that you're trying to get off your lot? There's also opportunity here as well. So a lot of different ways to use that. And we've seen some good questions coming in the chat. So Casey, I wanted to ask you from someone put in a question, what surprised you the most looking at this kind of data about the consolidation index? Was there any big surprises that came forward for you?
I think the thing about the consolidation index that stood out to me, and I was thinking back to the days of the dealerships, where there was a lot of times where you thought the person you were working with was all the conversations that you had, and all the talking about what kind of what the future looks like. Kind of find out some of those folks. I mean, there are some names on some lists of stuff that I'd seen in areas that I'd worked at. I'm like, wow, I really thought that was. I was surprised that person's on that list, right? And they might not know they're on that list too. That's the other thing too. Like they might not know where they're at, and they're conceptually moving things forward. But I think for the most part, from a consolidation standpoint, is I think the most important thing for me is truly understanding who are those people that are going to be on that they're working their way out of the business, whether they don't have someone coming back or it's the profitability issue, whatever it might be, is who is that growing operation that's going to take over those acres. And to me, when I look at the consolidation index, that's what gives me some latitude when you start working with folks. Is like just a good opportunity for you to take a look at these group of people probably going to take over this group of people, these acres, and it's going to help you understand how you need to move forward with relationship building, with portfolios, as far as what are we going to offer these two different customers as we start working our way through this kind of thing, and you start working your way through that. So in today's world, efficiencies tied back to machinery. If you gain 500 acres, you probably don't need a lot of stuff. But if you gain 5,000 or 6,000 acres, you might need an extra something or another. And I think that starts opening some doors up to conversations about equipment that you're going to sell. And also, if you're an auction company out there, what kind of demand you should start seeing for upcoming sales. So I think that's a good thing I drew from that as well.
That is the real value right there
Mhm.
of connecting it, not
Yeah.
only from what you need to who needs it, and then be able to make 1,000 more of those decisions
Right.
with more scalability. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then finally, the
Yeah.
last question is, where can we get it? Reach out to us. You can always contact your rep at Farm Journal to get your own dynamic profile. There are different calibrations. We sit with you and build it to kind of what you're needing. So it's a very consultative partnership kind of process. So yeah, definitely reach out to us if you're interested in anything that you saw today. Casey and I's information is here on the screen. If you'd like to contact us and kind of have more conversation, it looks like we've gotten to almost every question here in the chat. The other question here was just age and turnover, and absolutely, but don't be concerned. Age is not the only factor. It takes all of this operational data plus age. Then you start to see a trend. So don't count out the older producers and don't count out the younger producers. It's not split that way. So
Yeah.
thanks again for everyone for joining us today for the Farm Country Update. We really appreciate it.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.